I had a couple of colleagues who said they would like to view the presentation, but had other activities going on at this point in time. So I'll be glad to share the link out to any of those vacationers as well. Well, my name is Keri Hobbs. I serve as Extension Specialist for 4-H volunteer development in Georgia and with UGA Extension. And I'm pleased to join you this afternoon to, or at least this afternoon in Georgia, to share with you about a study that has been across our program areas of 4-H and Master Gardeners. And joining with me today, I have my colleague, Sheri.
Hello, I'm Sheri Dorn. I serve as the state coordinator for Georgia's Master Gardener Extension Volunteer Program. So Keri and I partner a lot in our programming with volunteers, and are pretty excited to share with you some things that we've learned.
So this survey, we affectionately have titled it Volunteer Training and Technology, and we'll be sharing with you today some of the preferences that we've learned from volunteers across program areas. We're also going to discuss our mandated training and really how this need for a study came about, and then get into some of the survey results as it applies to the training as well as future directions. So first, a little bit about the overview of our mandated training. In Georgia, probably much like many of the 4-H programs throughout the nation, we have a mandated training that is required of all of our 4-H volunteers, but it's also required for all of our Master Gardener volunteers, as well as Family and Consumer Science volunteers. And the same module is required of all staff members, whether they be faculty, staff, or within any capacity of service, particularly if they're working in a role of serving young people. This module is online, and at the time of this study, it was a 22-minute video. However, over time, it has morphed to be a 28-minute video, and will probably expand within the next year as well. So there's a need to truly understand, the best practices of launching this training, because it's going to be repetitive year after year while we do edit the content year after year as things slightly change. Within the training materials, we have this online module, but it also is accompanied by a handbook that is available online through a PDF, as well as a required quiz. And at the point of this study, the quiz was 12 questions. After offering this training across programs, we got mixed reviews that came back anecdotally from various crowds that spanned from volunteers can't access the training is online, and maybe our volunteers maybe didn't have the technology savviness to navigate the training, or others might have just noted that they didn't find the content relevant to their roles. So we thought that there was a need to go to the volunteers and ask them specifically what the feedback was, so that we could address their concerns as well as their preferences for hosting this training in the future. One point to consider is that there are various access points with 4-H and Master Gardeners. So we'll share with you a little bit about how they access this training. So for 4-H volunteers, just to paint the context of 4-H volunteers, we have over 5,000 volunteers who serve with 4-H specifically in Georgia, and they fall out into three major categories. So the first category would be that they have no supervision of young people, and maybe they don't work with young people at all, but instead they volunteer in some capacity with us, could be in an office setting, could be in a role of judging videos, perhaps. A second layer would be a need for a driver approval and a background investigation because they're driving something for us, or they're gaining some kind of responsibility, access to materials perhaps. But then that third level within a 4-H volunteer would be that they're actually serving with young people. So direct service, they're chaperoning young people. There are club leaders. They're the ones who are serving as those mentors to our young people. Once volunteers in the 4-H capacity reach that level 3, they then have to take this mandated training because now they're starting to work with young people. So the way the training works within our system is a staff member would go into 4-H enrollment, and we're a 4-H enrollment state. We have our in-house system, so we're not one of the 4-H online. So this is why I wanted to provide you with this detail. The personnel initiates the training by clicking a hyperlink within the system by the person's name. So if Tracy is the volunteer, I can find Tracy on my volunteer roster and click a hyperlink that says send link. That's going to send Tracy the link or an email with the links to the training. The email would then hit Stacy's inbox, and it's going to include 3 links. One is a hyperlink to the online video. At the time, this video was hosted in YouTube. Now it's hosted in an in-house system called Kaltura, but is very similar to YouTube. You click the link and view the video. The second link is a PDF of the handbook, and the third is a quiz. And the quiz has to be completed 100% correctly. It doesn't matter how many times Tracy might take the test. She has to gain 100% before passing to the next level. So once the quiz is complete, an email instantly is triggered to Tracy that says, congratulations, you completed this quiz. But then also the email would go to Tracy's supervisor, who in the system clicked send link. So everybody is on the same page that Tracy has now completed the training, and then also by Tracy's name on the roster, a check mark appears that she's satisfied that requirement. That training will become available as a send link annually for then Tracy to complete the training annually. So that gives you a little bit of context of how 4-H volunteers receive the training. It comes to their email, they access it through hyperlinks, and it's completely asynchronous.
So I'll add to that, Keri, that outside of Master Gardeners, you have other volunteers completing this training. So in addition to 4-H and Master Gardener volunteers, we have other volunteers in Georgia that are using the training, and they will most often, I'm thinking of our family and consumer science volunteers will access it through your enrollment links. So with Master Gardeners, just to tell you a little bit about how these volunteers access the system. First of all, we have about 2,300 active Master Gardener volunteers in Georgia. Our state has 159 counties, and we have Master Gardener programs in about 60 of those counties, largely clustered around our metro Atlanta area. In 2019, our Master Gardener volunteers reported a little over 179, almost 180,000 volunteer service hours, and of those hours, 19,122 were in support of youth projects. So roughly 10% of our volunteer service is in support of youth projects. So in getting the training to our volunteers, we wanted to personalize it a little bit. So we actually deliver the training links through our Master Gardener reporting system, our record keeping system, and we call that system MG Log. So each Master Gardener has a unique username and password to access the system. So they have links right there on their homepage. They just log into the system and it's color coded as to whether it's current or updated or not. So they will access the system through their unique username, password. They access the video just like other volunteers. They access they'll get the unique quiz link to complete their quiz. And the results are recorded in the 4-H system, 4-H enrollment, as well as MGlog. And so that gives our A&R folks, whether it's program assistants or agents, access to that information. So they can always stay on top of completion rates and so forth. So we actually have a little bit longer to complete the training. It's offered, it's updated annually. So our volunteers have a 2-month open training window, whereas Keri's 4-H volunteers will complete the training largely at onboarding. Okay. Next slide. So to give you just an idea of how we conducted our evaluation, again, Keri hit on some key points. We were getting some feedback. We wanted to see how accurate our feedback was. So we conducted a survey using a random sample of our 4-H volunteers and our Master Gardener volunteers. And you'll note 3 groups there, our 4-H volunteers. We'll use these acronyms throughout the presentation, so just to explain a little bit. We have the 4-H volunteers, and keep in mind, they are getting their risk management training at onboarding. Then we have a group of Master Gardeners who have completed this training. We call those the EMG, Extension Master Gardeners _RMT. And then we have a group of Master Gardeners who weren't completing the training, and we definitely wanted to hear from them. So we have a random sample of that group, and they are designated as EMG _non-RMT. So the goal was to have roughly 900 individuals selected for this evaluation. We've got that roughly split across those 3 groups. We used an online survey link. We used Qualtrics to deliver the survey. We sent those requests, those invitations to participate in the study and the evaluation via email. Gave them 3 weeks to participate, and at that point, or after 2 weeks of non-response, we followed up with paper surveys via postal, U.S. postal mail. So we had a mixed methods approach here to again get the best response from those 3 groups. Next slide, please.
Okay, so you'll see here that we had good response from the survey, and in fact, you'll find that majority responded through the first few weeks with online responses. The green in this table shows the most collected within a particular group. So with 4-H, majority responded through online, as well as the Master Gardeners who had completed the risk management training. It's not completely surprising to me that the Master Gardeners who had not completed risk management training responded by paper. And in some of these cases, it may have just simply been that their email addresses were no longer accurate with us. And that could have been the trigger as to why they had not completed the training, because we had incorrect email addresses. You'll see that the total response rate was 32.7%. For 4-H, it was 22.3%, a little bit lower than we would have liked, but I need to add the note that we had just completed another survey just prior to this survey as well. So what I learned from that is don't send too many surveys to your people at once, because they get burnt out from those surveys. We had a great response from the Master Gardeners who had completed risk management training with a 58.6%, and then 16.9% with those Master Gardeners who had not completed risk management training. So if we take a look at this over the generations and take a look by age, you'll see that we have within all of our groups, 4-H Master Gardeners as well, have 4 generations represented within the respondents, which it truly is phenomenal to show that both the new volunteers, the younger volunteers, and the seasoned all wanted to give their feedback. You'll also see here that we have a lot that fall within the Gen X category that completed specifically with 4-H. So within Gen X, 75.4% of the 4-H volunteers here, you'll see fell within the Generation X of 36 to 56-year-olds at the time, where the Master Gardeners fell more towards the baby boomer group, with the majority of them, 74.6% of those Master Gardeners who had completed risk management training, and 69.5% who had not, fell within the boomer group. Nonetheless, all 4 generations, though, were represented within these responses. So to take a look at the mean age of volunteer responses with online and with paper, you might find it to be a little bit surprising as you look at 4-H. The mean age for online responses was 45.9. I need to move forward with my other slides. I'm sorry. So this was the one I was speaking off of and did not share. My screens are not synced here. Moving on to the next, though, the online responses that were completed for 4-H, you might find it surprising that the mean age for online was 45.9%. The mean age for the paper responses was actually younger at 38.9 was the mean age, where all of the 4-Hers, 4-H volunteers overall, the mean age was 44.9, which is in line with our state program. Our state program's mean age is 44, so we're right on target there. With Master Gardeners, you'll see those who completed risk management training, 66.1 of them, the mean age of online responses was 66.1. The mean age for paper responses was slightly older at 68.3%, which is what I would expect to see. The 4-H model did shock me a little bit. But you'll also see with the Master Gardeners who had not completed risk management training, the online response age was 67.7, where paper mean age was 64.4. For Master Gardeners, the national average of mean age is 64.8. So as we take a look at all responses there, we were in line with national. So let's take a look at how these fell out within generations. You'll see the generational trends listed on the graph here. It's not surprising to see that that majority completed surveys online. I was thrilled to see, though, that majority of all the groups across the generations responded online. You do see an increase of the paper responses with the traditionalist group, and that is to be expected, but was not as great as what I was expecting, honestly. Okay, so as we take a look at the gender responses and how they were made up, this is again in line with our current programs. The male responses included 34.4% with 4-H and 65.5% being male, with the program makeup shifting to 43% and 57% respectively. You'll see that Master Gardeners completing risk management training, the males 20.6%, where the females were 79.3%. Those who had not completed risk management training, a few more males, 24.4% and 75.5%, where the typical Master Gardener program makeup. MGEV and EMG, both representing Master Gardener, we get mixed up on this graph. 18% of those being male and 82% being female. Anything else you want to add to that, Sheri?
No, just that we, no, go on.
Well, next, let's talk about what we learned, right? That's why we're all here, to learn about the volunteer preferences and then how we can make implications for those in the future and apply this knowledge for future developments. So let's take a look at familiarity, comfort, and use of technology by all of our volunteers. And Sheri, I believe, is going to tell you a little bit more about this, but you will see across the bottom of the screen the seven tools that we asked them about.
So one of our questions was, hey, are our volunteers comfortable? Are they familiar with, do they use technology? Because we were delivering this training across, we were using internet, we needed computers, online testing, so forth. So there was a technology component to the training. So we asked these same basic questions of all of our respondents. Do you use these things? How familiar are you with them? How comfortable are you with them? And how would you describe your use? So it was a 5-point scale. So we drew the line at that heavy black line, horizontal black line on that graph. We said 2 or above. If they indicated familiarity, comfort, or use at 2 or above, that's considered an adequate familiarity, comfort, or use with that technology. So you can see that across all the platforms we ask about, there was a fair level of familiarity, comfort, and use. The bars represent the 3 different constructs there: familiarity, the green one being comfort, and the third one being use, the gray one being use. So if you'll go to the next slide, Keri. Thank you. What's interesting here, when we plotted all of those 8 platforms and looked at them by program area, whether it was a 4-H program, the Master Gardener program area, you'll see that there was very little difference. The patterns followed through for both of our volunteer programs. And in fact, the familiarity scores were not significantly different. Okay, next slide, please. And we saw this same pattern with our comfort levels. Again, the 2 volunteers in both programs having very similar comfort level with each of these different platforms. Okay, next slide, please. And thirdly, their use patterns, again, not significantly different, follow the same patterns. Some differences, some slight differences, but not significant differences. So this is, again, very helpful for us for answering that question. Are they comfortable? Are they familiar with it? Do they use it? We can positively say, yes, they do. Yes, they are. And there's not a whole lot of difference. And, Keri shared a lot with you about those age demographics, those gender demographics, and it's all part of understanding how our volunteers respond. Keri, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, just a quick note that if you followed along in these charts, you would have, seen the top 2 rated things consistently on the comfort, the familiarity, and the use is still the same, but it's email and YouTube consistently. They're using email, familiar with email, and YouTube as well. And so that's a little foreshadowing that I'll do for you.
And I'll just add too, we took out some of our more intensive data tables just to show you these graphs. But when we did some comparisons, we were looking at generational use of these different platforms. We did see some differences. The traditionalists were the least familiar, the least comfortable with these different platforms, and they were, when you got to this use option, looking at the use of technology, The differences were not significantly different, but we did see that traditionalists use these technologies the least. Okay, so again, the difference not significant, but the traditionalists, which is our oldest generation of volunteers, having the lower usage. Okay. Next.
All right, so let's take a look at the most likely method of internet access. So this really helped reveal to us the question of, do volunteers have access to internet? And Sheri, do they have access to the internet?
Why, yes. Why, yes, they do. So we see that high-speed internet being the majority of responses in terms of the method of access, but just want to note here that follow closely by accessing the internet through their mobile phone. Okay. Next slide.
I think it's really telling also as you look at 4-H, having 67.2% with high-speed internet, a big chunk though over there with 21.9% with that mobile phone, which tells us that maybe we need to do more smart phone compatible type things. So
yeah,
if we take a look at this by generation, we still see high-speed internet regardless of that that age group. This does show us though with those mobile phone users that there are Gen Y folks, so our young volunteers, those that we're hoping to gain more of, right, so that we can continue to grow our programs. And if we look to that group as being the next trend, well, mobile phone capabilities and access points is what this is showing us.
Yeah, just to point out that category on the far right with no access, we had 0 responders indicate that they didn't have access. Very few, only 1 respondent indicating using public Wi-Fi. That's always a concern for training and security and all of that sort of stuff. But overall, our respondents definitely had access to the internet.
And the traditionalists having high-speed internet access, as a matter of fact. So we took a look at the primary device used to access the internet. And what we found here is that personal computers are being used by both groups, Master Gardeners and 4-H volunteers, but 4-H is nearly split with personal computers and smartphones. So again, we're looking at that new trend of smartphone capabilities. As I look to other tools that we use within 4-H, some of these tools will show me on the backside whenever you retrieve the analytics and insights of how this information was accessed. So an example of this is MailChimp will show you, not just how many clicks you got, but also how it was accessed. And it's not surprising to see that half of those who view my statewide 4-H volunteer newsletter are accessing through a computer and the other half through a smartphone, which now drives me to not just take a look of the view of my MailChimp on the computer, but to also mail it to my device and take a look at what it looks like on my device as well, because that's the way half of my viewers are going to see it. This is also in line with Kaltura, which is UGA's version of a video hosting site such as YouTube. Again, half of those are viewing through smartphone, half of personal computer, and that is more current analytics than this survey data. So I'm envisioning that that this data actually might even be shifted more to smartphone if we were to launch the survey again today. All right, so we asked about the training effectiveness. So, you know, what did you learn from the training? Did you gain any new knowledge from it? And the good news is
Very
that
good
they
news.
did, yes. That volunteers across program areas showed a significant gain. So you'll see here the before and the after scores. 4-H volunteers improved just as much as the master gardeners, where in some cases we thought, you know, 4-H volunteers have viewed this material time and time again, but instead they showed that they were gaining, and that was reassuring to us. Also, all generations improved similarly with that gain. There were also similar improvements between genders, and you'll see here how it breaks out within their volunteer role. There was a difference between 4-H and Master Gardener volunteers with the amount of gain, and you'll find that within this. You'll also or a note that I want to point out to you regarding the training is one question that we asked them as well was whether they thought mandated training was important, and across program areas they thought that it was important, but also thought that it was effective. So that was a win for mandatory training world, right? You'll see the significant difference between volunteers of different generations, so more master gardeners than 4-H volunteers, and the sample predominantly the baby boomers. Sheri, do you want to comment more on that?
Yeah, so this gives us, you know, the hint that, you know, the content of your mandatory training may be perceived differently, you know, across program areas. So there may be some differences. You know, we're going to get into this as we talk about applications of our findings to everyday work. But these differences in means in how prepared the respondents felt after taking the training, this significant difference suggests that there might be something there, you know, that underlying volunteer role. If you remember, you know, only about 10% of Master Gardener hours overall support youth projects. So we do so much more than just youth focused projects. So when we see this significant difference between generations, and that's across all respondents, that whole entire group is Master Gardeners and 4-Hers. And I just pointed out that to really understand that generational difference, you got to understand that we had more Master Gardeners in our sample than we had 4-H volunteers, and that primary demographic, primary generation is the baby boomer. So that significance is what I'm saying, is that significance may not be, you know, all that it appears to be. That it's more reflective of the sample there.
All right, so we'll next move into seeing some of the preferences of volunteers with future training. So as we look to hosting this training annually and making new iterations, how could we improve the processes in the future? And so one of the questions we ask is, what is your preferred completion time? And you'll see here the amount of time that they wish for us to give them. The red are our 4-H volunteers that are located on the front, and then our Master Gardeners who had completed risk management training, followed by the Master Gardeners in black who had not completed the risk management training. You'll find the highest columns within all of the groups is 1 month, where Master Gardeners favored next after 1 month, leaning to the 2 to 3 month. 4-H volunteers, maybe 1 week might be okay for some of them. We're going to aim to get them that training at least a month ahead for their completion. But it was nice to see that if you need to send it the week before for 4-H volunteers to fill their role, well, some of them might even prefer that. We also asked the preferred training point, and wow, you'll see here that whenever needed was the most popular response. Volunteers are great, aren't they? Whenever we need them to complete that training, Master Gardeners next said as available, as well as 4-H volunteers. So it wasn't necessarily they wanted it to come annually on this certain day, but instead, let us know when it's needed. Just give us a month or 2 to 3 months or a week ahead to make note that we need to complete that training. We asked about training environment as well, and if anything has shaped what the future developments, this is probably it. Before this survey, I had the notion that online trainings were what our group preferred, but I didn't have the data to back it up. What was amazing to me about this, not just that 4-H volunteers read across the front want an online training, but half of them actually want an online training with a quiz. And the Master Gardeners overwhelmingly want that online training with a quiz, which was shocking to me because I can't tell you how many notes I had gotten about the quiz and how they didn't want to take the test.
and we have a testing component to our overall Master Gardener training that's consistent from state to state, and that test strikes fear in the hearts of our volunteers. So it was pretty surprising to see that preference for a quiz.
I've asked volunteers a little bit more to understand, the quiz piece. I think it gets back home to that mastery piece. It's a way to show that not only did I watch the training, but now I've mastered the subject. And if I took the time to watch the training and master the subject, I don't necessarily want my friend to say he watched the training and get the same credit that I did, right?
Little spirit of competitiveness there.
Yeah, maybe that's my theory anyway. So their preferred training location. This did not hurt my feelings at all. It was great to see that they want to train at home. All of them, no, not all of them, but across the program areas, majority did say that they want to train from their homes, and then if they can't train from their homes, maybe the local extension office would be where they preferred. In this case, they had to pick their favorite. So you'll see that, some of these others got no votes, such as a regional location or a state location got 0 votes. My guess is that if they had been able to place some ranking on all of these and give points to each, they would be willing maybe to come to a state training. Just their most preferred is at home or at their local extension office. Yeah. Okay, so how do they want to find out about this training? They want to find out by email. 4-H and Master Gardeners alike, you'll see the big green bar here. They want to find out about the training notices by email. Next, 4-H volunteers, back to that phone. They want to get the second most preferred is by text message. Share with me what you need me to do by Remind 101 or text me, remind me where the link is. Master Gardeners were slightly different from that and could be a generational shift here, but Sheri, do you want to share with us there?
Yeah, you see in the second and third choices of Master Gardeners who completed the training, what I think of as more group settings. So a newsletter announcement, the meeting announcement, a little bit more popular for this group than the Master Gardeners who had not completed the RMT training. So, these Master Gardeners that have not completed the training, there are several different indicators, which we don't have time to go into every single one of them here this afternoon, but there are several different indicators in the data that suggest these volunteers are not quite as engaged as the volunteers who completed the training. And so again, when you zoom out and you think about this from a future application sort of standpoint, not all of your volunteers will engage at the same level. So if you have a mandatory training and you've got volunteers who maybe aren't as connected, aren't as informed, aren't as involved, but you still want them to be an active part of your program, you may need to try some of these very specific, very personal types of approaches. You know, that letter in the mail, that text message, and emails, as we found in our data set, emails can change, and we may not have that updated information. So having these other backup approaches, it's very helpful to us to answer those questions and define, you know, solutions. What's the next choice kind of thing. So Keri, I took those differences with our master gardeners there is, you know, some of those, they're more plugged into the group setting, maybe a local organization. They're really actively involved. They're going to get news through a newsletter, through a meeting, sort of thing. Versus those master gardeners who maybe are on the fringe, you know, on the outer fringe, and they're not connected so much with the group, but they still need to get that information.
Yeah, I would see the 4-H volunteers wanting a more personal, tailored approach.
Yeah.
So contact me about my next role, and then the need to tell me about the need for my training as well. And that may come in an email. I'm shocked to see that phone call is number 4, but in some ways, I'm very thankful that the phone call is number 4, and an email and text message, even the letter and the mail, were more preferred.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not so much into phone calls, it looks like.
So let's talk a little bit about the application. So we learned about this. Now what do we do with it? How do we apply it for the future? How does it improve our situation in the future? So we're going to look at this through 3 overview umbrellas.
Yeah. If you want to go straight on to the first one, we'll talk about how we can enhance our volunteer experience. We've said this a couple of times. We are really glad to confirm, to have that empirical evidence that we are training in, you know, one of the most desirable formats for our volunteers. And it's very refreshing to know that we see those very similar patterns across, you know, the various groups of volunteers that we talk to. We did fine tune things a little bit here in Georgia. That enabled us to increase the completion rate, especially in that master gardener group. But we know that we are delivering training in ways that fit our volunteers, and we are anticipating increased mobile device use. So that's a take home for us as program coordinators, you know, some things that we need to look ahead to and look forward to. It was really, really helpful for us to understand that it's not the technology aspect so much that is objectionable, but that we start seeing some differences in perception of volunteer role and the content of the training, and that's what we've got to keep in mind. So, you know, that just because we were hearing, you know, some rumblings, you know, some content there, didn't necessarily mean that we needed to rush in and change something. So we did fine tune and tweak a few things that ultimately benefited the training, benefited the program, us, everything. But that we weren't far off the path. So, anything you want to add to that, Keri?
Yeah. So for 4-H, certainly this showed us that maybe while we had previously been looking at you know, more ways to have regional trainings or statewide trainings, we you know, thought that our volunteers, and I think some of them do, really treasure that networking piece. So we were providing opportunities to network throughout the state. But after gaining these results and understanding that convenience really is important, and the ability to be able to, you know, train at home or within my local office, I was able to really also think through the processes and steps and really the advantages of training in your local extension office. You gain a better connection with your local agents, but also you're able to quickly get on the same page with your volunteer activities. So I know now that MJ is my contact within my programming, and now I know if I have a problem, I go to MJ, I don't go to Sheri. MJ is going to be my problem solver. But then also MJ can give me a really great orientation of what are the processes on my local level of my local extension office. How do I rent or how do I check out a room within my extension office for a club meeting? How do I get copies made for my club? Or what happens if I need to, get a reservation on the 4-H bus? What are the processes for that? These are all questions that MJ would be the one to answer to be able to manage, those local resources and connections. And so by offering trainings that are right there online, but also blending the approach so that volunteers could go into the office and meet MJ and gain the resources they need on the local level, has really been a benefit for us in Georgia, while also getting back to the preferences of our volunteers. So I would say it's been a win-win. And one of the ways that we have, shifted what would have once been potentially a statewide training, now we've looked at how can we cut down the 3-day statewide training to be a 2-day training, and then that other day being back in the local office to network with the local volunteers and gain a local connection with others who are serving within that unit. And that's been very positive for us.
Yeah. So we also found that we could increase our effectiveness, that we're not wasting time in pursuing other approaches that aren't as effective. We are watching, as I mentioned earlier, we're watching for those volunteers who may be less engaged. They may need a more personalized approach, and I've seen that not just extension volunteer groups, but other groups, the other nonprofits that utilize volunteers. We really have to pay attention to those folks who are already involved somewhat in our program, that we don't lose them completely. So I found a lot of value in an application in that preference data that came out of this study. And we also see a lot of opportunities, increased opportunities for cross-programming collaboration. I mean, that's one thing that we've done a lot of. Keri and I have done a lot of collaboration, across the youth programming, with Master Gardeners, A&R programming, and to be able to look at these questions and the responses across the program areas allow us to look ahead to future volunteering training, to really anticipate those developments, those responses, how we can shape it, how we could tweak it. We're seeing, we're conferring here, we're realizing that life stage may have an impact on the usefulness of distance training. Keri was noting how parents who have young kids at home, especially right now in our COVID-19 situation, they may not be interested so much in an online training. No more online training. I'm a little full right now. Whereas our Master Gardener volunteers are really, really responding positively to online training opportunities. So that life stage may also factor in here. So again, if we understand this, if we're approaching distance training, with these awarenesses in mind, it really does help us as personnel to increase our effectiveness.
And just as a disclaimer, I was making this note as it related to cyber school and how so many of our 4-H parents, our 4-H volunteers are parents who would, then now be teachers of cyber school in their household. So potentially now that summer has come, we might have more success with that particular group. But I have definitely seen within 4-H volunteers who may not have individuals at home who they are taking care of, they're very quick to want to join in on the virtual conferences that are being offered, or any kind of online meetup or catch up, that type of thing for the social aspect potentially.
And I'll add one more thing, Keri, back up to that first bullet about not wasting time. When we have volunteers who don't get the training completed within the time frame that we need them to complete, there's a lot of other steps that then happen, to get them back up to speed and get the, make sure that their records are current. So it really, when we can make a knowledgeable approach to a training implementation, not only do we increase the effectiveness, we get them, a higher completion rate, but, we save our time as employees. We also save our volunteers time. So again, increasing that effectiveness.
Absolutely. So as we look to our third umbrella, our third goal really with the applications is we want to support a more prepared staff as well as a volunteer force. The more prepared staff for engaging volunteers are going to create a better environment for volunteers to serve. So a few notes about that. We now know the training is effective, right? So that as we're sending out this mandated training to people, we don't have to feel quite so guilty about another check of the in the box, but in fact, there's knowledge gain there. I never had any doubts, Sheri. Remind, and I'll let Sheri add a bit about this, but for us within 4-H enrollment, it might be sending that email trigger to take the training, and then it might be sending it again, and then it might be following up with a text message. But the note is always the same in the 4-H volunteer world, in that the volunteer cannot engage in an opportunity within that program year until this training has been satisfied. And once they realize that, but also catch up to the time, they'll complete it and satisfy it. For some, it might be they're waiting the week of because that was their preference.
Yeah, and we find with our volunteer base that giving them notice, letting them know that it's coming, reminding them, giving agents, a nudge to ask volunteers to update their contact information. So again, our system has our volunteers actually update their own contact information. So giving them to do that, spreading the word, letting them know that the training window is coming, is really helpful. So many of our take-homes are communication oriented. Our volunteers, in my case, our volunteers really don't care much for surprises. So, again, having that notice, remind, is really, really very helpful at increasing the completion rate that first go round.
We're now preparing to deliver more online trainings, but not just online trainings, which are indeed helpful with social distancing, but making sure that these online trainings include quizzes. So even if it's a 15-minute video, what questions can I ask to ensure that knowledge is gained, because volunteers want a chance to show their mastery of that. And in fact, it helps us as extension professionals, right, to see that they mastered that subject.
Yeah.
So we'll learn new ways to create quizzes that capture the knowledge. We'll also look to new apps that we could potentially use with new devices to potentially test those out in the future.
Yeah, and we just looking towards a more prepared staff and volunteer force, just letting agents know, as agents being prepared, that there might be a little bit of problem solving in implementing the training. That if you do have some folks that may be uncomfortable with an online training platform, just having that, again, this goes back to that advance notice and reminding, that there might be some really simple things that we can do. Make a space available at the office to get the training done. You can have maybe a tip sheet that has these shortcuts to solving a sound access, or sometimes it's being familiar with browser tabs that pop open, new windows that open, and how to get back to the quiz. Very simple stuff, but just anticipating a little bit of that problem solving and being able to respond to it.
I still have computer issues that come up while teleworking, and yeah, it's just back to problem solving. And I can't tell you how many times I've had to call our local IT staff to assist with some computer something just while we've been home. So I think that just goes for everybody. There's some amount, as we're working with technology, of problem solving that comes along with it.
Yeah.
All right, so moving along to some resources for you. Part of this study is available through a Journal of Extension article in the February edition of 2020. It's called "Debunking the Myth That Technology is a Barrier for Volunteer Training Delivery." So note that it's a myth here in Georgia. We'll be glad to share that link out if you're interested in reading it. The latter half of the materials that we shared regarding mandated training and preferences are currently in review with the Journal of Human Sciences and Extension. And then we're hopeful to provide a tip sheet for you soon. If you drop your email in the chat box, we'll be glad to share a copy of that once it's available. We can also share it back with any who are registered in registration within a 4-HYDP webinar also. At this point, we're happy to open discussion for any questions that you may have, recognizing that it's 1:57. We also understand if you need to hop off and onto your next Zoom, but note that Sheri and I will stick around, and we're happy to answer your questions.
And while we're waiting for questions to come into the chat box, Keri, I thought we'd share some ways that we adjusted to our findings. You know, that we noted that as we made future changes to our training, we added some pictures that were more reflective of our whole organization and all of our volunteer bases, and yeah, that we adjusted the name, tweaked the name so it seemed a little more inclusive of all of our volunteers. Yeah, so we used it as well.
Okay, so I've gotten a question about our year one onboarding process, and I'll be glad to share that. So assuming that a volunteer is coming on to work with young people, and they're going to reach that level 3 to serve as a chaperone or a mentor for youth, they would complete a volunteer agreement, which also includes adult behavior guidelines, and it's a one-page front and back. The front has 12 questions that have agreements that are listed in the back, what we expect. The behavior for our adults, which also include our 4-H Youth Code of Conduct as well. So what we expect of our youth, we also expect from our adults. In addition to that, we have a screening application. So our volunteers supply references. They supply 3 references that are then checked, and then also UGA, the University of Georgia Human Resources, would conduct their background screening and supply back to us whether they're approved for then hiring as an additional layer to that. If UGA agrees and everything is checked clear with our references and all is good with our communications with this individual, hopefully they've also been interviewed, but it is not a requirement that they've been interviewed. They're then asked to come on board, and the next step would be they would get this this training link before starting service. And then we also have, depending on their role, we have a getting started volunteer orientation, which is a blended learning approach. So that's kind of a quick overview of what 4-H looks like. Master gardeners are very similar, but a little bit different.
So we, in terms of onboarding, our Master Gardeners go through for a minimum of 42 hours of training in all subjects. But in response to this need to understand youth protocol, we added a 2-hour class, Gardening with Youth, and we go over the research-based benefits of gardening with youth. right along with our university protocols for working with this audience. And so, we tell them your homework assignment is to go home and complete this training. So we get a little bit that way.
And so 4-H will provide trainings mostly based on the role that the volunteer wants to complete. So after that orientation piece, then it's, where are we hoping to fill them in, and then we'll provide the content specific information while also embedding essential elements of youth development as well.
Keri,
Yes.
as I've been listening, and I will say I've been multitasking. I haven't got lunch yet.
Missing seeing your background.
Yeah, you and I still need to get that fixed, don't we? And get my picture up there. As I listened to the first half with the research, which is great, the second half, I'm thinking that a mini version of that would be really good, that we could share just with county staff that put their heels in about trying to do this. I see Sheri shaking her head. So I think that, I don't know, have you thought about that? And do you think that's something, see, I'm in our conference room. I'm in Stillwater today. So
yeah, I love the backdrop. That's great.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just think that might be something that if we could do a mini version for those.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's something then I can share. The first half of this, they're going to roll their eyes back and go, bah! But I think the second half, can be tweaked, whether, Sheri, it's Master Gardeners or 4-H or both, that we could hit that targeted audience with a little 15-minute, because I could see myself using that when I'm doing my onboarding process, and I'm talking about that, and it would be something that, if I could play a little 10-minute something to say, here's some research that was done, and it's not coming from me, because it's always better from an outside expert.
Yes.
We know that.
Yeah.
So just a thought.
Yeah, Carla, that sounds great. I had kind of envisioned that with the tip sheet, but I think a video is great too, and really gets back to maybe what our people prefer.
Yeah, I mean, because they could listen to it while they're doing something else. Mm-hmm. And that might be something when we're talking about NECV and we do roundtables or quick talk, that might be something that would be great with that.
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just laughing. I'm just giggling at all the ideas.
I tend to be an idea person.
I get it.
Keri's laughing at the list that we have together.
So anyway,
I'm out of room on my paper.
I know I've got 3. I told my support staff we're here working on 4-H Online. I have these 3 books trying to keep up with all the to-dos and the ideas. So totally get it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
job.
Thank you, Carla. And I love that idea of mini videos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've got a couple of email addresses for folks that would like our tip sheet, Keri, and I don't see any other questions coming in the chat box. MJ had made a comment earlier just saying that our data was interesting, especially as so many people try to tell us they don't have any access to internet or that they don't email. Yes.
And so the situation may be a little different in your state. I can't say that it's exactly like Georgia's, but I will say that we were hearing similar responses, but then the volunteers told us differently. So you might ask your volunteers, I don't know.
I feel that sometimes, this is Tracy in North Carolina, I feel that sometimes it's because we hear the squeaky wheels,
Yes.
but not always. That doesn't, show the whole data. So this is really good to see the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think the same thing holds true, Tracy, whether it's staff or volunteers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. If this had been a convenient sample, if we had simply just gone out and surveyed, people we had immediate access to, there were, really captive audience, you know, I would say, hey, you know, we're talking, you know, to the outliers, the people that are really into this kind of technique. But because we random sampled and talked to, you know, decent samples of the 3 different subgroups, I think that we're not talking to squeaky wheels, or that, I guess it really points to, you know, it supports the idea of, you know, the squeaky wheel.
Mm-hmm. All right, any other thoughts or comments?
I'm laughing at MJ's with "it seems boomers email most." That's moi. I'd rather do that than text.
I think you said that in the survey. Yes, rather email than text, but growingly, I'm seeing more and more, and I'll say probably especially the younger groups, where you get a quicker response when you text versus email. All right, Christy.
Someday they're going to be old in their fingers and their eyesight, and they're going to understand.
I've decided, Carla, some of it might be a matter of so many emails coming in.
Oh, I agree. But I think texting is not a whole lot different, you know, being bombarded with it. It's just shorter little blurbs.
Yeah.
So.
That's right. There's only so much somebody's willing to crank out with their thumb.
Exactly.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. We will follow back up with the archive to the session, and we can provide any additional materials if we end up making many videos, many lessons. We'll also share any of those resources out in the future as well. All right.
All right.